small group again today. So let's roll through our agenda. Stand up. We haven't got the stand up item now. Let's put it back into our document to make sure we do it. Let me start with stand up, and we'll try and restrict it to things that.
Do we need?
Sorry.
Do we need to review last meeting? Anything?
Yeah, I've got that in the. Oh no, you're right. Stand up is there. Reviewing last meeting is before stand up. Okay. That's good, because then I get a chance to think about what I've done that's relevant for stand up. Okay, reviewing last meeting. OS X build bots call to action. So we were talking about the need for newer OS X machines. We did have a company called Redfin wanted to donate some hardware, and we had a call with them, and the current status of that is that they're keen to donate the hardware, but they're not as keen to host the hardware, which is what we would ideally like somebody to host it so that we don't have to figure that out for ourselves. So they're moving forward internally to see if they can set up something with a smaller set of machines and see if their operations department can be happy with an alternative arrangement than just throwing all of these machines on their network and giving us access to them. So that's in progress, and then we have to. We're still looking at other avenues for solving this problem, but we still need new build machines for OS X. We looked at defining Node core. I don't know if we discussed that in much depth. We shifted to meeting every 2 weeks, and we briefly talked about roll-up reporting, which we are going to talk about again this week. So let's do a quick stand up and try and limit it to things that are relevant to governance, I guess, or just higher level stuff. So Jeremiah, you've put something down, so you go first.
I attended NodeConf, and there was some relevant discussion as usual about like Node and Tsc things there. Nothing super notable, but I don't know. Yeah.
Michael, you've put no TSC related business. I'm going to write that down in the document. What about Brian? You got anything to report?
Nothing really big, but a few odds and ends. We changed the day that the inclusivity group meets on, just to better accommodate people's schedules. At NodeConf, I ran 2 sessions on the new facilitation framework. I got some good feedback. People seem pretty positive on it, but of course, a few questions and clarifications they had, and a couple other good ideas too. So I think that was useful. But that's about it for me.
Alexis?
Nothing really TSC specific.
Okay, myself, I started a CTC repo on the Node.js org. That's meant to be for collaborators and the CTC, and that's looking at bigger picture items, so things that are not as immediate that you would just open an issue or a pull request for them on the Node repo. So CTC, the repo takes some of the purpose that the roadmap repo had previously, but it's less about far future, more about things that we need to be concerned about and we need to be thinking about now. So there's some interesting discussions going on in that repo that are sort of relevant to the near future of Node. And I think that will be a good place for raising things before they jump on us. Been talking TC39 and modules and trying to work on improving that relationship with TC39. It's obviously something we need to have working better. And also Electron, working on the Electron relationship. And this is an interesting one for the TSC because Electron is part of our user base. So people that use Electron or that develop for Electron are developing Node. And so how do we as a TSC start to consider that as within our boundary of concerns, and then how do we interface with that project and the users of that project, and also if part of our mission is to expand the growth and expand the use of Node, does that mean also helping to expand the Electron user base, therefore expanding the use of Electron and Node? So that's just something to think about. Okay, so on our agenda today, we've got 3 items. Just put these down. Document. Regular roll-up reporting first. So this is something I mentioned last week that I'd love to get going. William Kapke opened an issue for it, which is great. Issue number 109. So my idea for regular roll-up reporting was that we would identify the active and I guess significant working groups and activity groups around the organization and ask them to put together a report in a certain frequency to provide to the TSC, and then we would put out a rolled up report that contains all the contents of that. So we need to, I guess, see if we think that's a good idea, and then talk about frequency and which working groups we might put in that list. Does anyone have any thoughts on this?
Isn't this like really similar to what I'm doing on the Node Source blog right now?
It is
a weekly sort of thing for now.
Yep, it is, except I imagine this to be less frequent because it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be, it's going to be a little bit of a burden on the working groups to get them to report. And I suspect also it's going to be a burden on us to herd those cats. So it's going to be a lot less frequent, and it's going to be getting those groups themselves to report the things that they think are significant. So there's some overlap, but it's more about getting them to tell us, or to getting them to evangelize the things that they think are important.
Yeah, I think hopefully you'll get more than just this is what happened, but this is also what we're planning, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I agree it may take a little herding, but it would give a better view of what all is going on, I think, to some people who only will read that versus looking other places.
Jeremiah, how do you collect that information right now for the blog?
Manually?
Do you just kind of like go through issues and just kind of see what the issues are opened, or do you look at like recordings and stuff from meetings?
If you look at the organization, it will list the repos that have had any activity on them, and it'll say when they've had activity. So I manually filter through that. Like, there's stuff that ends up being not as important or harder to clarify, and that's a lot of what the actual work is.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of having the working groups generate a report as well, because like I think that's it's definitely a really good start, and it's definitely better than nothing. But like Michael said, it would definitely be nice for groups to also say like this is what we plan to do in the future, which isn't always captured as well.
So the way I see it is that not all of the working groups that we have are actually that active. But some of them are very active. So maybe what we should do is come up with a list of working groups that we need to include, and then open it up for any other group, including language groups, that want to report, but we don't have to go chasing up. So have a core set that we really want reports from, and then we'll go chase them up, and then allow anyone else outside of that to report if they have anything. So does anyone want to start with a list while I just jot some notes down about the conversation so far?
Verbally, or do you want us to try and type it into the doc?
Go verbally, and I'll write it down.
I'm thinking LTS makes sense to me, just because that's good to update people on important things going on there. I know there's a lot of interest in the diagnostics one now, so I put that there.
Yeah, inclusivity, of course.
Yeah.
Build, probably.
Yeah,
we give all the working groups a chance to report, and even if they don't report anything, then their section would be empty.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about what are the core ones that we absolutely want to include and that we will chase up. So if for example, we put out a call and say, okay, it's time to give your rollout report, and nobody responds, who are we going to go and chase to get a report from? That's the list I want to make now. But we give everyone a chance to report.
Yeah, I think that chance is always good, because certainly like on the benchmarking one, I'd like to use it as an opportunity to try and drum up more interest if I can, even if there's not a ton of activity.
Yeah. Benchmarking website, we probably want the Docker working group's pretty active, and there's a lot of people interested in that. That would probably be useful.
Well, Build is doing a lot of stuff with new platforms and
testing. I think testing.
Testing and the docs.
Yeah, testing for sure.
The other question would be, what do we do about the things that aren't necessarily working groups but are like important projects? Something like Citgem or Node GIP or Readable Stream.
And even do we consider Express in this list?
Yeah.
Yeah, those other things you mentioned, like, do they have a group of people who are actively working on things?
Yes, all the important code projects are typically, on average, more active than the average working group.
Yeah, so I mean...
Because, yeah, there's people that depend on these things for releases.
Right, so it's almost like it shouldn't be working groups, but we want to get reports from the teams of people that exist out there as to what's going on.
It's kind of like an awkward language thing, because I have this exact same problem expressing this on the blog posts I do, because I also include the releases of these projects on there, because that's kind of important. But I just call it a working group roll-up, because what else do you call it?
Yeah.
Well, what about the CTC? Will it make sense for the CTC to provide a report? I mean, it's got a very broad charter, but it still has a charter over all the things that have not been delegated to working groups, right?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that. What would a report from core look like?
Yeah, I'm almost thinking TSC might make even more sense, because it's dealing with different things, whereas the CTC, it's a lot of sort of the discussing if there's any problems with things, not maybe that.
I mean, those things are interesting.
Yeah.
People would. It could potentially be the most interesting part of this for people, because it's not easy to find that information as it is. just what do we say that we want from the CTC?
Well, it deals with a lot of stuff like the ES6 modules or the promises changes, right? That are big roadmap changes. That would be probably interesting.
Okay, so let's think about. So CTC would ask for big picture things, details about releases, anything that's currently actively. Yeah, because I've tried to do this before, where you go through the repo and find out what's interesting and relevant to people, and it's actually really hard to draw the line because there's so much that happens that is just trivia. But there's other things that almost reach a boundary where it would obviously be interesting to users, but finding what that boundary is tricky.
The thing in too is if this is going to be like monthly or something longer, you risk getting what's hot that month versus what happened during the month. It's almost
True.
like for the CTC, what important decisions were made over the period.
Maybe it would make sense to have like maybe a weekly thing that's pretty lightweight that maybe only includes like the CTC and the TSC, or maybe like 2 or 3 groups. But then monthly is where we'd also have like all the working groups and things like that. Do a much bigger. Maybe something like that might help.
You're going to have to find someone on the CTC that can take this as their thing. I'm not going to be able to do it. That'll be the trick.
Yeah, and deciding what the content, I think, is the other, like you said, is the other challenge.
Yeah, so Brian, maybe what we should do is couple that with the 2 weekly meeting, the bi-weekly. Bi-weekly? It's such a terrible term. Fortnightly meetings? That's not a word that you guys use in America, is it?
No, I think
most
people know what it means.
The meetings every 2 weeks that we have for the TSC, maybe part of our meeting schedule thing should be finalizing a report to put out, and then we put that out maybe on Medium or something like that, and that includes CTC and TSC. So what have we worked on this week as a TSC, and what has the CTC reported to us as things that have been going on?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
And yeah.
Yeah, I like that too.
And then do we build that? Do we have a roll-up of that information in the bigger roll-up? What's the different level of reporting there?
I think it would make sense to roll it up, but another thing we can always do is we can just try this, see how it works, ask for feedback.
Okay.
And how is it going to go out? Was it
Another question.
Be a blog post somewhere, or what's the?
Well, we have a blog, so maybe we should just use that.
So how would we go about collecting that information as we go? Is it just like somebody goes through the issues and try to build a summary, or maybe we can tag issues with a label or like candidate, and then somebody selects from those?
I think what we need to do is make the groups responsible for the reporting, so not us. So we give them a schedule, and we tell them this is what we're going to come asking for reporting, and please make somebody in your group responsible for this task.
And leave the methodology completely up to the group.
Yep. And that would be interesting to see what would happen. The diversity of approaches there would be very interesting, and perhaps we would learn something from that.
Right. perhaps we can give it some guidance on how many items we expect from them, right? Like 10 to 20 bullet points or something like that, so that it's balanced across the organization.
Okay, just taking notes here. Sorry. So with the projects, so we have, Jeremiah, you put readable stream down there. I left streams out of that. Well, we left streams out of that list of working groups, and the reason I did is simply because they don't have that much autonomous activity. For readable stream, what would we just be looking for releases? Is that what we're looking for from projects? What do you imagine coming out of the project reports?
Like I don't really know. I feel they're at least as active as like these other groups that make sometimes non-technical, sometimes technical decisions that are mostly not code, right? I guess the build working group does a lot of code related things and stuff too. Like these projects like all do tangible things like always. It seems silly not to get some report of what's going on there. I mean, readable stream mostly mirrors core streams or attempts to these days.
It just doesn't get released as frequently. So maybe just releases is good enough from readable stream. Same with HTTP parser. That's not an autonomous group really. It's just part of core now. So asking for release details.
Okay.
And are
Maybe
there
those
individuals
shouldn't be on that list then.
for the report from?
Sorry?
Like, for HTTP parser, who would we ask for the report from?
James? I don't know. Let's leave that one off. How about we remove HTTP parser for now? And put it on if it reaches a threshold of interestingness. I put LibUV there. Sorry, Jeremy.
Do we also remove readable stream then?
They put out releases, so maybe we will leave it on there and just ask for release details.
I mean, usually those releases don't really have that much. Yeah, from following it, I don't think that's like the kind of thing we're looking for.
Okay. Node.js is going to be interesting because I don't know if anyone's noticed, but we're struggling to find really somebody that wants to own it. A lot of the activity of actually putting commits in is done by Ben, but I don't feel that Ben feels that that he wants to own that project. And so a lot of issues go unhandled. We don't have that frequent releases because no one's pushing on it. We're just sort of in this critical maintenance mode with that. So it'll be interesting to see if we can find someone that wants to report on it. Perhaps it's as easy as just going through the commit log with that one. I don't know.
Is that one going to become more critical as V8 moves away from JIP too?
Probably. It's been critical the whole time, and it's still critical. I think it may increase, but it's still it is such an important project, but we just don't care about it enough, and it's hard. It is really hard, particularly when people come up with Windows problems that you look at and you go, what is going on here? Yeah, and some of the output that people post in logs, usually they show up and say, this is not working, here's the output, and the output's got nothing. It's so hard to interact with people that report on that. But maybe this is a good way to highlight some of that and ask for contributors. So let's just quickly brainstorm what we would ask for from these groups when we go out saying, we need your report, this is what we need from you.
I'd say, what's new, what's happened since the last report? And what are you planning would be two key things.
I feel that doing this on a bi-weekly basis, though, for projects like Node.js would be overkill.
Yep.
I think
the suggestion
quarterly would be more appropriate, probably.
The suggestion was to do it more frequently for core and TSC.
Right,
but less.
a quarterly rollout.
So it's okay. Let's deal with that first. How frequently? Do we want to do it monthly, quarterly, or some other schedule?
Monthly sounds good to me.
What was that?
Monthly sounds good.
That's what I'd like. I have a feeling we'll struggle to get that on, but
yeah.
I think people.
My gut feeling would be quarterly would be even better.
I think both times would work better for certain groups than others. So I think we should. I think it'd probably be best just to try one and see how it works. Maybe start quarterly, kind of while we get these processes in place, and then we could maybe revisit and look at doing more often if it feels like there's kind of an information overkill in these.
Yeah, like there's a gap that's too big or something. Or even, I don't know, quarterly is 4 times a year, is like bi-month, every other month, 6 times a year.
Oh, that's a good idea. I like that.
Bi-monthly. Yeah, that's a nice compromise.
Okay, because 3 months sounds like a long time, but 1 month sounds like a short time, so maybe 2 is good.
I feel what's like the thing we're gonna end up running into is that people are gonna want these more often, and the groups themselves are gonna have trouble producing them more often, right?
Yep. But there's also another problem, which is if you don't do it frequently enough, then figuring out what's going on in between that time is going to be more difficult, because the span of time for memory is going to be tricky, and then searching through GitHub for what's happened is going to be tricky. So there is a balance there, which is we can't leave it too long, but we can't do it too frequently. But I think, as Brian said, let's try something and see how it goes, see how it works.
It makes sense for the CTC to be more frequent, right? Because it covers so much more. And then the longer term one can be a selection for the CTC part, can be selecting across the multiple reports on the CTC and build a higher level summary.
I think most of those working groups that we really care about on that list for this kind of thing, for following up about it, could probably do something monthly. I feel like if you go beyond monthly, you're probably going to start missing what actually happened.
Another option here is to make it opt-in. So instead of us chasing them up, just say, look, this is going to go out with this frequency. If you get something in, great. If not, then maybe next time. And then we could do something more frequent, say monthly, and let working groups decide how frequently they report. The risk there is if we're not chasing down a list of working groups we want reports from, then they may end up just falling off the list completely.
But I guess the other thing would be do it monthly, but then chase people. Like the ones we want reports for, we might let it go for 2 months and then chase them. Like we don't have to chase with the same interval that goes out with.
Okay. How about we do it this way? I think we've got the skeleton of what we want. How about we move it back to GitHub and put together a proposal here? I suspect that William might have some input here as well, and maybe he'd even be interested in helping organize this effort. So how about we do that so we can move on?
Sounds good.
Okay. next one, issue number 108, which is adding Brian as a member of the TSC. So I'm going to restate what I said in there, which is also an apology to Brian for letting this linger. So the reason why I've been keen to hold off on this is simply because we have so much in flux about the existence of this group. What are we doing? What are we responsible for? How do we overlap with the CTC? One of the reasons the TSC was set up was part of this idea that we would expand in our scope and we would have all these other projects going on, and we would be much more sitting above that and helping coordinate, helping facilitate that activity. But we've since come back to this idea that we are focused on Node Core and the things directly surrounding it, and that our boundaries are a lot more limited than was originally conceived of. So I was keen for us to figure out exactly what that was before we start talking about membership of this group, because maybe this group doesn't even need to exist, or maybe it's just a branch of the CTC that does administrative stuff. So that's why I was keen to hold off, but I actually don't see that being resolved very easily in the near term anyway. So we have Brian, who was nominated by the inclusivity group. We did ask for a representative to sit on the TSC, and so Brian has been here as a halfway member, not actually a full member, but almost a de facto member. So as I said in that issue, I think let's move forward with this because Brian's been very valuable, and I think he will continue to be very valuable for what we do. And it's actually just great to have people that are interested in this kind of work. So I'm keen to move forward. Unfortunately, we don't have a quorum, but what we can do is do a vote of TSC members on here, which is there's only 3 of us. Unfortunately, Michael Dawson, you don't count as a TSC member on the original membership list. So myself, Jeremiah, and Alexis. So if we do a vote here and then move it back to GitHub and try and get enough votes, enough quorum votes there, we should be able to make it happen. So is everyone okay with that?
So I just want to point out one thing. The asking for a working group to nominate a member, what do we do about that long term? I think that we brought this up at the inclusivity working group too, and it wasn't really resolved. So like once like some arbitrary period of time has passed, like for the nomination from the working group should be like ask them to reconsider, or is this like a permanent thing until the group like decides, okay, we'd like someone else in, or they resign, or like how do we deal with that?
So again, just because of the uncertain state that we're in, I think rather than setting something up automatic, I think we should handle it manually for now. So if inclusivity wants to swap out their member, then like we can deal with that, but it'd probably be best if we did let Brian resign and then vote somebody else on, rather than having an automatic seat, because that fixes in place more of the more process and official stuff we build around this group, the more difficult it might be to unpack that if we need to change it. That's my concern there.
Right, I agree. I don't think it should be automatic per se. I just want to make sure we consider that. I'm +1 for adding Brian to the TSC.
Yes, I'm also +1. Why is Michael not part of the TSC?
Because when we split the TSC off, Michael wasn't part of the CTC at the TSC at that time, because IBM and Stronglib had merged and they had to kick some members out of the TSC as it was, and so when we split it off, the membership list was from that time. So there's some new members on the CTC that are not part of the TSC simply because we've left it fixed and we haven't automatically brought them in. Does that make sense?
Yes, so we still have the same company restriction on the TSC.
Well, that's another interesting point, because if we do that, then and we start trimming members. So if we ask everyone that doesn't show up here to resign, so people like well, actually, I mean, we all know their names. People that don't show up, ask them to resign, and we have the company restriction thing. Then we're probably going to automatically run into trouble with myself and Jeremiah, and then I imagine that Michael would probably be a good candidate to bring on, but him and James.
Yeah.
So
we only have like 6 to 8 people who show up regularly for this one, I think.
Oh.
Yeah. Isn't the restriction 30%? I mean, that would technically work out, because there'd be Rod, me, Michael, James, and Brian and Alexis. That's like the people that regularly show up. And then like, doesn't like Fedor or someone else like occasionally pop in?
Colin does. I'd probably
Colin,
imagine
right.
he would stay on.
Bert shows up every once in a while.
I don't think we're actually running into any problems with that at this point.
Actually, that Bert would probably be one I'd like to see if Bert can join us, but I think that depends on where he's going for himself, because he seems to be dipping his toes into Swift and possibly moving on. So, but I'd love to have Bert join us at this level and have Bert step down from the CTC. But that's
those company restrictions, if they made sense for the previous TSC, that was the unified TSC, CTC, they certainly make sense for the new TSC as well, right?
Yeah, they do. I'm not suggesting at all they should be undone, but that might be a tricky thing we have to hurdle.
Yeah, the easiest was
Yeah.
to have more people, but only so many votes.
Yeah.
It's too bad to say, sorry, you got too many people, but on the other side, it'd be fair to say, but in terms of influence, you only get so many votes. But I also understand just being there is influence too. So yeah, it's a hard thing.
Yep.
Yeah, and it is just observing that, if we have 7 and then 2, 2, 2, we are very, very close to the line. And it's like, just slight imbalances could put us over the line.
But that doesn't. I don't think that really matters though, because like if a slight imbalance occurs, we're required to adjust to that. That's how the rules work. So IBM is at 4 members in the CTC, and at one point, like when we bumped that back up to 4, that was like pretty close. Like if like 2 people stepped down or something, we would run into problems. Like that's always kind of been a thing, but it hasn't really manifested itself as a problem.
Yep. Okay, so given all that, let's take a quick vote from the 3 of us here on Brian. So all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that's 3 of us. So I'll take this back to the issue and try and get enough people to vote that we have a quorum, and then it can be official, presuming that we do get a positive quorum. Okay, so preemptive welcome, Brian.
Thank you, everyone.
I'm sorry, there's not more of us here to make this a big deal. So lastly on the agenda, defining node core. This is really something we need to figure out to make progress on the whole thing about purpose of this group. The William actually made an interesting comment, I thought, the last comment in that thread right now, which was actually, I don't know if it was William's idea or someone else's, but was it William that said it?
Yes.
Okay. So the idea that we define node core not by a definition, but by a list. So we could. I think I like the idea of having a basic definition of what node core is, and then having a list of things that fit within that, so that we don't. And then to change that list, we have to have a bit of a discussion. But that would help us get started here. It doesn't help us if we want to expand our activity autonomously. That would be ideal. So we have the ideal is to have a really nice definition that this is what Node Core is, and then we, as the TSC, get to decide what is under our umbrella underneath that definition. If we just have a list, then it means that changes to that have to become a negotiation with the board. But given how difficult it is to come up with a nice definition, maybe we could definitely consider that idea of a list. These are the things that are in Node Core. Has anyone had any more thoughts on this definition thing?
Well, one thing I suggested before is that the question is a bit ambiguous in itself. Like, what is Node Core? It could be left to different interpretations. Maybe we can rephrase the question, like in the sense of how we're going to use the answer, right?
Yeah, I agree, because I think there's different answers depending on what context you're in.
Like from a technical perspective, you could identify with certain parts of it, but the question really is, what does the TSC want to have authority over?
Yeah, I definitely take this view of, this is the things that we have authority over and the things that are necessary for us to be able to accomplish those, whatever this list is. And that being able to accomplish can't, that's how we get in, the non-technical bits, which are, really just as important. I do like the idea of having like a list plus a generic statement, and then maybe some language around like, this is how we expand this. Kind of making that a little clear, so that way it's like, we leave some sort of option of expanding it, but at the same time documenting it, so it doesn't look like we can just, do, uninhibited expansion into whatever.
Yeah, and a list item isn't necessarily so precise it can't be expanded either, but I think where we're kind of stuck, maybe if we tried to build a list, it would be easier than trying to write a paragraph, right?
Yeah, and just to go back on that thing about dealing with the board, the board's going to be cooperative, and unless it's something really controversial. So if we had trouble coming up with a good definition that was expansive enough for our own purposes, and just went with the list to help finish that off, and something came along that we said, okay, we really think this should be within the scope of what we do, but it doesn't come in obviously within our definition, and it's not on our list currently. We want to add it to our list. If we went to the board and said that, then I'm pretty sure the board would sign off on that without any trouble, unless it was something controversial like Appium or even Express. Like, that would have been a good conversation to have with the board beforehand anyway.
Yeah, for something that big, I think regardless of the scope, that it still does make sense to have that consultation anyway.
I think the list removes ambiguity in the present situation, and the more general criteria gives guidance for the future. So, but it would be good to say today, express yes or no.
So do we try and rekindle that item by saying, hey, we're going to try and build a list, throw out your bullet items, and we can then take that and prune or craft the items from what we get, and including us, of course, all throwing in ours as well.
Okay, well, how about, can somebody from this group put up their hand to make a new issue that extends from this one and proposes an initial list of just the list of what would be included in a definition of Node Core for the purposes of governance, and propose that as a straw man so that we can then take the discussion forward. Somebody like to volunteer for that? That's not me.
I'm happy to volunteer.
I'd love to do it, but I'm on vacation for the next 2 weeks. So if this can wait, I can also. But Michael. Please.
Yeah, I'm happy to put something together as a starting point, and I'll read through what we already have and see what I can come up with. And if any of you guys have any bullet points on the top of your mind, let me know, and I'll put them in there too. But I'll try and do that early next week.
And I'm probably not the best person to come up with the list, just to my knowledge, but I'll definitely help out with some of the language sort of around the list.
Yeah, I reckon if we come up with a list and we look at it, and then it'll probably help us come up with some language to blanket some of them automatically, and then have others that are, here's our definition plus these projects.
Right.
So if we start with just the list, let's look at that first, and then work on language in GitHub for that.
So in the live stream chat, Josh Gavant is asking, why don't we represent the entire non-browser server-side JavaScript ecosystem? Maybe we should clarify that quickly for anyone listening.
So let's step back to the purpose of this discussion. So if you recall, we had I tried to take to the board this idea of a mission statement for the whole foundation, and it contained three things in it. One of them was that the foundation looks after Node Core. The second one was that it looks after the open source ecosystem around Node. And the third one was it looks after the, by looking after it, I mean foster, I can't remember the exact language, but it's fostering the ecosystem, the open source ecosystem around Node, and then fostering the commercial ecosystem around Node. So that includes tools, services, education. And then leading from that, we had the question of Tsc autonomy. So when we set up the foundation, the Tsc was given autonomy over Node. So we could do our stuff, and the foundation, we don't have to go to the foundation constantly to get sign off on stuff. So the autonomy was actually built into the foundation from the beginning. Unfortunately, we took that too far, and this idea of having an umbrella over lots of open source projects that are related to Node, that started to happen, even though a lot of us were uncomfortable with it, and we never really bought into it. We brought Express in under that. And then the board expressed concern about expansion, and I think a lot of people were concerned about us expanding on this level. And when you think about it, if the TSC has autonomy and the TSC is autonomously expanding, that's a bit of a problem for governance for the whole foundation. So we scaled that back, and I tried to get buy-in from the board to give us autonomy, like to according to those three areas in the mission statement, that the TSC would have autonomy over Node Core, that the TSC and the Foundation's executive, which is currently Michael, Tracy, and some other part-timers, the executive would work with the TSC to manage that second part, which is the open source ecosystem, and then the executive and the board would take some responsibility for the commercial ecosystem. So Node Core, we do what we need to. Then the middle bit, which is the open source ecosystem, we work with the executive, but we also we don't have full autonomy, so we come under the board for that. So if we want to take action in the ecosystem, then it's a discussion with the board. And then the commercial thing is a separate thing. So the idea here is that we want to define what Node Core is so that we know what our area of autonomy is within the TSC. And then anything outside of that we think we should be doing automatically sparks a conversation through the rest of the foundation. And we need to get proper buy-in to do that. So if we imagine that Express was a new issue now under this new definition, and that we had dealt with it as we did, then that wouldn't obviously come under Node Core. So Express is a concern. We need to deal with Express. We've got all these issues going on there. We decide it's important to look after for the Node ecosystem. We have a conversation with Michael and his people, and then we start talking to the board, and we get a decision from the collective about how we want to deal with Express, or if we want to deal with Express, rather than just taking autonomous action on Express and then creating a bit of an uproar about that. Not an uproar, a bit of concern. So that's why this definition is important. So rather than just being about server-side JavaScript, that's a little bit too expansive for the TSE's purposes. That's more of a question for mission statement for the foundation. There is an issue, by the way, Josh, in the Tsc repo with that mission statement. If you want to critique that still, because it hasn't been signed off on. If we want to adjust that, we can still do that. The idea is we do this definition thing, then revisit that and try and get that signed off by the board. Does that make sense, everyone?
So to me.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay,
well, I think starting with the list thing and kind of going from the definition with that's probably the best way forward. So let's do that.
Yep. Great. Michael's going to take that. Thank you, Michael. Okay, so anything else on that before we move on? Because we've got a few minutes left. Nope. Okay. QA. Do we have any existing questions on? Actually, where are you collecting questions? Is it on YouTube? Jeremiah?
YouTube stream, yeah.
Okay, so if anyone has any questions, then please comment in the YouTube stream comment section, and we're happy to discuss things that come up.
There was some comments earlier for discussion before that I actually missed. So William says, consider that other organizations will have their subgroups, committees, bring on a secretary, take the responsibility of doing reporting. These are not the people that are required to have the skills of the group, giving people an avenue to get involved.
That's a good point. I think what we can do with that is build that into when we ask from the groups what we want, we give some options for how they approach doing that. And I would think that it would be logical to assign someone within that group that has the interest in doing it, whether or not they're a member of the group or just an outsider. Like the CTC, for example, doesn't have to be a CTC member that does the reporting. Perhaps a collaborator wants to and put a note in the doc about this. So just quickly for the stream, William, we'll take this discussion back to GitHub and make some progress. I suspect that you would be interested and helpful in moving this forward.
He also brings up that since working groups are autonomous under our governance, they're not required to report. That's true. They don't have to report, but that doesn't mean we can't still bug them for a report.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm not saying that this is something it's mandatory. We can't do that, but I think it's like a due diligence thing for us. We want to know what's going on, so let's go out and try and make sure we get information about that if we can.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to cite the fact that they don't have to versus just ignore us if they don't want to.
Yeah. One other thing, Josh Gavant says, it isn't clear how someone would qualify to be part of the TSC, which is true.
Yep, and I agree. And I think again, my suggestion is that still is unclear for a reason, and I don't think we should clarify that yet until we've sorted out this mission and the role of the TSC. Once that's figured out, because if you think back to when we first split off the TSC, the idea is that we have there was a suggestion we have a member from each of the working groups and each of the projects that come. No, it wasn't the working groups. It was each of the new projects that came on. So we'd have someone from Express, we'd have someone from, if we brought on Appium, all this sort of stuff. If we followed that through, we'd end up with a TSC that is quite different to Node Core. It's not representing Node Core anymore. That's my concern, one of my major concerns, that if we decide that this group is concerned primarily with Node Core, then its membership should reflect that. If not, then great. But yeah, I think it's something we're still to resolve, but it's a step in that process. Does anyone else have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think even though the specifics of people from different projects, it probably isn't going to bear out. I think the sort of spirit of the idea of having representatives from whoever the groups are that report directly to this TSC on the TSC Yeah, I definitely think it should look something like that. So the CTC, assuming that we're very focused on Node Core, the CTC would probably be the majority of the TSC, but also the inclusivity working group, and if there's any other working groups that float up to that level, or any other groups, kind of like that spirit of representative of the groups that it's overseeing, whatever that ends up looking like in practice.
I think where that gets a little bit confusing is that some of those working groups that are like pretty important are like technically kind of under the CTC. And oftentimes there's overlap there, and they deal with stuff that's more of that level.
So I think that there's two things here. One is that we know that it's going to be hard to get people that are interested in doing this kind of work, and so we do have to be a little bit liberal with who we let on here. And I know we've been a bit exclusive so far, and I think we should change that at some point. The other thing is that membership of the TSC and being observer in these meetings is not that different. The same as on the CTC. We have the same thing where we have these observers in meetings. Decisions, there's not that many decisions that actually come down to a vote. So in practical terms, if you're in one of the meetings and you're at the table, then that's almost important enough. So if we combine those things and we say to the working groups, look, we'd like representatives from you. Well, we offered you a seat at the table basically, but not necessarily a membership of the TSC. Then that might help us grow this group, which would be a positive thing, even if it's not technically expanding the TSC itself. So yeah, something to consider. But yeah, I think we probably do need to consider expansion in terms of getting more people here and discussing the things that we discuss, even if it's not membership. So that's probably something we need to put on the table already. Both Josh and William are obvious candidates for having a seat at the table. Simply because they're both interested in the activity here and they comment and they contribute.
Josh comments, +1 to Rod, but it's hard to be locked out of voice comms on YouTube.
I'm sorry, Josh. It's nothing about you personally. Anything else? Okay. Well, top of the hour. How about we close off then? So action items are, I'm going to chase up votes for Brian. Michael's going to post about the list of things that would come under a Node Core definition. And I will post updates about the roll-up reporting into that existing issue, which is number 109. And our next meeting would be the 30th of this month.
Right.
All good?
Sure. And I don't know if you want help, but if you wanted any help, I'd volunteer to put the minutes into an issue and for review and all that.
Actually, yeah, I would love that, actually, Michael. So if you want to take these minutes and file them, that would be great. I've managed to make pretty good notes here, so unlike previous meetings.
Seems like it's pretty much there. I'll just read through, round them out if I have any other recollection, and shouldn't take long, but happy to do it.
Great. Thanks for that. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Been a productive meeting, I think. See you in 2 weeks.
Talk to you guys later.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Call recording